Okay, I will call the meeting to order. Can we have a roll call?
Present.
Present.
Here.
Here. Okay, now we'll go ahead and get going until Fred, our chairman, comes in. We are now on item number 3, which is to approve the minutes of the special meeting of September 23rd, 2019. Has everybody received the minutes? Any questions or changes? Can I entertain a motion to approve?
I'll move that we approve.
I'll second.
Motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor? Okay. Motion is approved. Okay, we will move on to item number 4, committee goals and objectives. And that is going to be presented by...
So this is an item that Fred had requested, and so
Okay.
maybe we want to come back to this one.
All right, we'll move on then to the next one. Okay, item number 5 then, staff responses to questions received from committee members. And that is... That is yours, okay.
So firstly, for people in the public, we do have about 20 questions with answers in the back of the room. You can see the lengthy answers. They're not all going to be on this presentation, but we're going to go through all the questions that we had received from committee members and provide answers. I'll be fairly brief. I'm not going to dive into every word, but if, at the end of each one, if you guys have follow-up questions, or would you guys prefer to go through all of them and come back?
Preference? Any preference? All of them and come back, or stop after each? Anybody? Stop. I have a stop after each over here. All of them over here? Okay. Get them all done. Anybody else?
Okay, so here we go.
Okay, looks like most of them wanted to get them all done first.
Okay.
And go back.
So I only have a handful of slides, and those are reserved for within the document for charts and things like that. The rest of the words I didn't throw up on the slides. But the first question was whether or not California had a preferred IRP. No, but within the guidelines it does mention certain resources that you'd consider, including solar, wind, battery, etc. And then the follow-up question: would these be useful starting point for determining future NIM rates for customers? And then our answer is that the issues facing IOUs are different than the issues facing RU, and it doesn't make sense necessarily to apply the CPU's guidance to the POUs. And I think that a running theme throughout this will be, as you can see, that Reading is in the center of PG&E territory, and they have lines, we have access to resources, they have access to resources. And so this can't be further or better demonstrated than what happened last week. Every utility is different. If you see one utility's resource stack, transmission resources, generation resources, et cetera, you've pretty much seen one. So IOUs are in a completely different market, especially with Reading. We're part of Bank. It's a different balancing authority than the ISO, et cetera. So that would be a no to both of those follow-up questions. The second one is relative to time of use pricing. Currently, Reading does not have plans for time of use pricing. So for folks, or time of day pricing, for the education of folks, the idea is that you would pay a higher price on peak and a lower price off peak. So you'd pay, generally what you could say, I'm going to pay 12 cents in the morning and 30 cents in the evening. And the idea is that by having people pay more in the evening, they have an incentive to use less, which would reduce transmission needs, reduce generation needs, et cetera. Reading right now, and this will also be a running theme, we are so long on resources that our cost spread between off-peak and on-peak is only about 3 or 4 cents. There's been studies done that says to really get customers to react on time of use pricing, the spread between peak and on-peak needs to be at least 3 or 4 times. So your off-peak would be 8 cents, and to get really people in the evening to turn off the lights and change their behavior, the evening would be about 24 cents. But like I said, based on our resources, we're long on resources. There's no real cost justification to go time of day at the moment. And then the other idea about whether or not this would reduce costs. So annually, some of us go to APPA's Business and Financial Conference, and there's roundtables. What we've learned is there are utilities, including Riverside, California, who's fully deployed advanced metering, but because they have so much data coming in and not enough IT professionals to handle it, they've spent all the money on the infrastructure and have not saved anything on meter reading. The same thing, so there's a utility in Texas, they replaced their meter readers with information technology professionals, and their personnel costs actually went up. So we don't really see at the moment, are going to go through a meter modernization and change out mechanical meters with digital meters, but at the moment, for our entire system, we're not planning on doing advanced metering infrastructure that would support time of day pricing. The next question was, can we see $88, the cost detailed in fixed, variable, and semi-variable components? So I'll go to this first one. Here's this first slide. And you can see purchase power, that's variable. Fuel and variable O&M generation costs, that's also variable. And then the LTP contract, that's variable. LTP contract is a maintenance contract based on run hours for Reading Power Plant. And then you can see down below is the fixed, so generation, A&G, O&M, so that's going to be the salaries down at the power plant, et cetera, that if we run for 2,000 hours in a year or 3,000, the wages for the power plant managers is just probably not going to change, right? MSR expense, that's it's entirely for stranded assets, stranded debt. That falls off July 1 of 2022 is the last payment for that. Tank expense, that's fixed also. We said this a few times, and not just here, but also at council, that almost all of our transmission costs are fixed. We are owners of a transmission line. And when we have excess, we trade between members of the balancing area, but we don't find really much savings by not using it. The next one is other transmission that's fixed. System O&M, A&G is fixed. There was a question or a statement made at the last council meeting that generally accepted accounting principles says that salaries are, including salaries as fixed, that's wrong. I would make the argument that salaries, right, are fixed over time relative to increased sales is variable, right? So if you pay your employees $100 to show up each day and they don't sell a single cup of coffee, that's fixed. If they stay late because there's an event and you're able to sell more or whatever, that would be variable costs. Debt service is fixed also. Revenue funded capital, that's fixed. We need to maintain our lines. And I don't know what this flickering is. In his future life, he was the building maintenance guy. And then the in lieu payment is also fixed. The in lieu payment, though, for everyone's edification, will most likely decline over time. The trend in the public power sector is that, the trend in the public power sector is within the renewable space is to transfer more towards purchase power agreements and not actually own those assets. So for example, when our ownership of MSR fell off, our in lieu payment did decrease commensurate with that. So you can see the $105 down at the bottom of fixed costs. So what we did is we actually reduced the in lieu payment, primarily because we see a future, we'll still have some costs associated with our administrative building, but very far into the future, you could see a point where we maybe don't own a ton of assets. We do see that the Reading Power Plant could be very, very valuable. If you all remember the duck curve that we showed at the last meeting where you have a ton of renewables in the early afternoon and it ramps up, almost goes vertical into the evening. The only way right now to meet that ramp is with thermal generation. If batteries, large-scale batteries do come online in the future and everyone has batteries everywhere, that could be handled by that. But also it was removed so it wouldn't be a distraction. The in lieu charge is almost like this philosophical thing that can derail a conversation, and we left that out so it wouldn't be a distraction, because when we arrived at $88, it made the argument well enough. So if you take out this about $6.2 out of the 105, and then we also, in the notes, it says that we removed some wholesale sales to also reduce those fixed charges. That's how we arrived at the 88. But as you can see, and this is not unique to Reading, I think in the water industry, about 85% of the costs are fixed. In the electric industry, it's normal to see about 70% of the costs be fixed.
Joe, I just want to add, last week when the power was out in Shasta County and other places, the media and customers were wanting to know, how are you keeping it on? Well, the transmission, the WAPA, the tank, that's how we kept it on. We're on a different system. We have a different interconnection. WAPA and tank aren't doing the PSPS shutoffs like PG&E. So anyway, that was important last week.
So number 4 is relative to break-even price of solar for customers and making assumptions, et cetera, payback, discount rate, borrowing money, et cetera. So we have an exercise coming up. I think it's agenda item 6, and we're going to dive into each one of those. Number 5, as far as community choice aggregation. So CCAs at the moment cannot participate in the service territory of a publicly owned utility. The whole idea of CCAs, at least as far as I understand it, is for local control. The whole reason why there would be a publicly owned utility owned by a city would be for local control. So having a CCA operate within a POU would be redundant efforts. So number 6 is so the WAPA monthly electric rates paid by REU for 2014, 15, and 18. So we just have 2014 through 18 here, and you can see it's the top line. It's $53 a megawatt hour, so that's 5.321 cents per kilowatt hour, right? And then 2015, 6 cents. 2016 is 4.7 cents. 2017 was low, that's only 2.14 cents. 2018 was 3.6 cents. The next question was wondering, how much natural gas the plant used for each calendar year. So you can see the annual fuel flow and the average monthly fuel flow below that. The next question is relative to water use at the power plant in gallons. And you can see that units 1, 2, and 3 are our peakers. Those are generally used to meet summer heavy load. So you can see that those aren't really used in the spring or in the winter. Units 4, 5, and 6 are efficient and clean, relatively clean, you could say, combined cycle generators. Units 5 and 6 are the generators, and Unit 4 is the steam turbine. The next question is emissions by month. So this is 2018, NOx, CO, and CO2 tonnage. So number 10 is, when does REU system tend to experience its peak load, and does solar generation help reduce peak-related capacity cost at the system level? So RU's annual peak load typically occurs on a weekday near the end of July between 4 and 5 in the afternoon. On a monthly basis, peak load usually occurs between 4 and 6 p.m. However, in winter months, the peak load may occur between 7 to 8 a.m. and 4 to 6 p.m. And then whether or not it reduces our capacity cost at the system level, the answer, as far as we see it, would be no, because pricing spikes in California typically occur when solar is not producing, and that solar is not a good way to mitigate peak-related capacity costs in California. Also, when we're talking about being long on resources, we have 187 megawatts of generation down on Clear Creek Road, right? And so whatever the natural gas prices are and our heat rate, that's kind of our bookend for costs. And so behind me on the projector here, you can see the red is bad, right? So green is really low prices, red is bad. And this is from actual costs to run. You can see our bad tops out at $57 a megawatt hour. That's about 7 o'clock in the evening. And so July hits $56 at 8 in the evening. September, 8 in the evening is $57. That's our bookend. That's Reading Power. So you can see that the highest price that we paid for variable costs for energy was about 5.7 cents a kilowatt hour in the summer. Number 11 was, are there any additional circuits that may experience deficiencies during the daylight hours in the next several years that distributed solar could help? Currently, no, or at least no known ones. 12 is what are the distribution system's losses avoided by delivering solar customers behind the same transformer or feeder? So we're saying that the max losses that could be avoided would be 3.4% of the actual generation that was sent to the grid, excess generation, but that's assuming that it comes out and it's served behind the same transformer, which is not always the case. 13, what was the total annual load in kilowatt hours 10 years ago, and what's the most current load figure? So 2009 Reading load was 827 million kilowatt hours, and 2018 Reading load was 756 million kilowatt hours. 14, what would be the value of REU of stored solar energy that could be utilized during the peak hours between 7 and 10? And so there is a typo on this. I want to point out that the value would be about 5.1 cents. On the handout it says 4.8 cents. 15, is there a limit of solar feedback that can be accommodated by the REU system? What costs are associated with the excess solar feedback, feed, equipment needs, etc.? So an engineer wrote this paragraph, and so I'm not going to try and explain all of it, but we are implementing a remote metering project that will basically sample the system from around the city and get more intelligence onto the grid to help us figure out if backfeeding is causing an issue on our grid. Number 16, how can REU use the conservation funds available from the state, and can they be used to offset the cost of revenue losses from NEM payments to solar customers? So Reading, to be clear, we do not receive any funds from the state. It's a one-way deal. We send a check to the state quarterly to the CEC so that they can provide governance, and et cetera. There's actually, on everybody's bill, there's a state surcharge, and that goes to the state out of the ratepayers. So we do have 2.85%. There's a law that says we have to spend 2.85% of revenue on public benefits programs. That includes energy efficiency, low-income programs, et cetera. And then also offsetting the payments to NEM customers. My assumption is that this question refers to cap and trade and the revenues that we've received from selling excess allowances. That revenue, as far as we can see it, is for new renewable resources. So perhaps that couldn't be used to make payments to the customers that already have it or are grandfathered in, but perhaps it could be used for doing a rebate program or something along those lines for new solar customers. And then going to 17 through 20 are payoff times for solar, how long they should be grandfathered, or what should that payback period be, I guess, the price of each kilowatt hour paid to solar customers to allow the desired payback. All of these items, the issues of daily, monthly, and annual true-ups, actual cost and effect on payoffs, I'm hoping we can all discuss this on item 6. The value of current solar customers backfeed to the REU system. So solar generated and consumed by customers with an instantaneous period is valued at 15.28 cents. So when we're talking about like on peak, what's the value of solar? Is it really worth it for us in the summer? And we're telling you that our bookend is about 6 cents a kilowatt hour. But when customers are generating solar in the summer and they're using it then, right, they're running their AC, it's effectively not, their meter isn't spinning forward or backwards. So it's being valued at 15 cents if instantaneous generation meets instantaneous need. But solar fed back to the grid is valued at 3.9 cents. And then as far as healthy conservation, green energy, how we are viewed as a community, maybe for it being attractiveness for new business, perhaps you can add that as an item in agenda item 6. There's a question about how many new homes have been built in Reading between 2006 and 2019. You can see 2006, 7, and 8, fairly busy. Almost died off in 2011 at 32 homes, and it's ramped up. And then so far through 2019 year to date, we're at 178. So we're back to maybe 2007 levels. And then multifamily, you can see there was a large number of homes built in 2006 and 2007. I'm not sure that multifamily applies here. I believe Mary looked around, we tried to find. We haven't found one large multifamily building where someone's gone and installed solar. The next question was the average solar rebate was noted as being $7,770. What's the median figure? The median figure was $3,210. What is the total cost for replacing the present solar meters installed since 2006? So for residential, dual register meters are the same cost as standard meters, and meters that are replaced will be reinstalled at non-solar residences. Those meters are about $75 per residential meter. And commercial meters would just need to be reprogrammed. The meters are to go out there and reprogram, et cetera, so that's all in for the an hour of labor, and the truck would be about $125. The next one, and it's on the screen behind me, is the average POU purchase price per kilowatt hour, and the report from EES was 6.2 cents compared with ours of 3.9, and the difference. And the largest difference is capacity. We're not valuing any capacity within ours because we don't have a market to sell it into. Number 27, of the POUs listed on page 10, the average term of grandfathered solar installations was 20 years. And then pasted down below, just for the committee, and we'll post this online, there was an email received as far as the value of solar, and we provided a response to that. Similar to, in brief, we've received a lot of information, a lot of people providing it, informing us about the value of solar, and oftentimes it's different balancing areas, different types of utilities, investor-owned versus publicly owned, et cetera. So that's provided there as well. But the crux of it is do actually solar customers subsidize non-solar customers? And in a long-winded way, our answer is no, not from our perspective. So with questions to that, I'll do my best to answer. Mr. Beans probably as well. And then if you get jumped down way into the weeds, we might call up one of the subject matter experts.
Thank you, Joe. First of all, I'd like to apologize for being late. I was out building fences around the house that I had that burned down, and I had help, and I didn't want to leave until the last minute, and then it took me a little longer to get here. Sorry. Thank you, Joe. Any questions for Joe from the committee about the answers? Yeah.
Okay. The behind the meter expense, you say you estimate that with solar that you get a 3.4% value from the solar from behind the meter. Is that what you're trying to say?
No, what we're saying is avoided system losses. So if we provided it, losses would be maybe 3.4% higher than if a customer provided it to their neighbor. I think that's what the point of that is.
Is there any value to that? I mean, is there some type of if that wasn't there and they had that loss, what would be the cost to REU?
So, and I don't have the chart directly in front of me, but when we proposed our 3.9 cents to council, one of the factors adding up to that 3.9 cents was avoided system losses, this kind of very thing.
Took that into account.
Correct, yeah.
And then one more question on 13. What was the reason for the decline in the peak load for City of Reading? Is it just conservation items or?
So I think it's a combination of both, right? It's going to be both behind the meter solar, and it's going to be that coincident usage that we never see, but it's also going to be energy efficiency. And I would say it's I couldn't tell you exactly, but a lot of it is energy efficiency. We updated our load forecast this year using updated numbers from the federal government as far as average use per household and what that trajectory looks like, and it is declining. So we adjusted our forecast, and when we did that, our 10-year revenue plan, beginning this year for the next 10 years, reduced our revenue by about $4 million a year, so about $40 million over that time period.
So then so part of that's the solar, what the solar does, but it's hard to kind of pick it out what's what.
Yeah, it'd be solar energy efficiency. We are contracted with a consultant that's been doing our load forecast, and they're going to do a deep dive and basically disaggregate our load forecast into in different issues because the state wants us to focus on energy efficiency measures that reduces on-peak load, right? Everyone's trying to solve for that ramp. So one of the things that we just went to council a few months ago and got permission from them to do was to expand our scope of work and disaggregate our load forecast to figure out what's really driving our load forecast.
So, but with the 3.9 per, or whatever the 3.8 cents a kilowatt for the solar on your new proposal, it takes all this into account, behind the meter, the losses, this loss here of output or not need to run your power plant as much. That's all been figured into your chart.
Not necessarily. So not necessarily the power plant, because we're only the variable component, because we're going to have to pay that debt and the salaries, etc. But as far as the avoided energy cost, yes. So what we valued it as, when people are generating, or customers are generating solar during the summer and they're using it, they're being paid 15 cents a kilowatt hour because their coincident usage meets their generation, correct? So the 3.9 cents is the value of that solar when it would be most likely be exported to the grid, and that's during the spring and the fall.
Okay, I'd just like to thank the city of Reading for having underground lines, because I had my knee operated on Wednesday and your power did not go out. So, thank you.
I have a question, Joe. I came a little late to this, but I think from what I heard was, if we're not going to have non-solar customers subsidizing the credit rate that we pay to for excess solar to solar customers, you're saying that there are very few variables that we can use to change that from 3.9 cents or whatever it is. But you mentioned cap and trade credits. Is it through WAPA?
So we have cap and trade funds. So every utility in California was allocated a certain number of allowances, and then over time, cap, right, it ratchets down. And it's not the same law as the RPS standards, but it kind of has the same goal, right? So that ratchets down while RPS ramps up. And so over time, you would use less and less, or you're being allocated less and less allowances. And if you burn and you have to go buy those allowances to offset your carbon emissions, you have to go buy those on the open market. So we received allocated allowances based on our resource stack from several years ago, when we had San Juan. And when we divested from San Juan, as a benefit to us, right, from divesting from a coal-fired power plant, we still have those allowances that will ramp down through time. And so we've been able to sell our excess allowances because we have a fairly clean, by California standards, portfolio stack. And when we've sold those off, over $20 million to date, we receive those to do several things, but they all need to effectively reduce carbon footprint in California.
Okay, so I don't know what the numbers are regarding those credits, but I can see that there is a connection between clean energy cap and trade credits and solar. And you did say that there's a possibility that we could use some of that money to reimburse or to credit solar customers in one way or another. Right now, I'm thinking about the people that are not, we're calling it grandfathered in right now, but future solar customers. It's going to be very difficult from what I'm trying to figure out how we're going to make solar feasible and make everybody happy. And do you have any idea about how much money could be used to maybe bump up that 3.9 cents payable to the future solar customers?
So that could be calculated as far as what amount of money would be set aside to do that, and et cetera, and what the program looked like. That would be obviously council's prerogative or their decision.
Right.
What you could do is you could take the 3.9 cents, which is effectively our avoided cost, and then if you determined what the rate actually needed to be to incentivize folks to do this, which what we're going to jump into in item 6 is I'm going to attempt to calculate this all with you. You could take the spread between the 3.9 cents and say you guys think it's 9.9 cents, right? And so you could take that 6 cents, this is just in my head, and multiply it by the amount that would go forward and backwards, et cetera, between the customer and the grid and back to them. And you could maybe advance that in a form of a rebate to make sure that it's incentivized. But that's just, it's not fleshed out yet. And
Well, I understand that, yeah. And we don't know those are real numbers or if they would even work. But at some point, the committee, I presume, is going to come up with some kind of a recommendation for this rate. be it avoided cost or a little above avoided cost or a lot above avoided cost, whatever. And the council's gonna have to sit down and decide whether they wanna go with that or some version of it. And so I'm just thinking, you know, as some kind of an alternative, if we're gonna bump up that credit rate back to solar customers, that might be something that we could throw into the pot.
So two things. One of them is when you speak, can you guys pull your mics closer? You're not all getting picked up on the recording. And two, starting in 2021, our allowances for the greenhouse gas money is reducing by 75%. The state is phasing this out, and there's very specific guidelines.
Called part peak rate, which is from 10 to 1 p.m. and 7 to 9 p.m. And then he got 606 kilowatt hours. Most of it was at their lowest rate, which is 19 cents basically per kilowatt hour. But anyway, when I looked at your chart that you gave us, and then this here, I don't know, it just doesn't seem to kind of jive. I mean, your peak rates are different than PG&E's, so.
So are you referring to the chart that's on the screen behind me, and it's almost like a heat map of when
Well, that map there, and then also that graph you gave us, it was on the first presentation you gave to City Council, yeah.
So, as I had mentioned earlier, every utility is different, and every utility has different resources. And I would just, I guess, remind folks that our cost of distributing and running the non-variable cost, right, all of our fixed costs, is about 11 cents a kilowatt hour for residential, which means our variable costs, you know, are about 4 cents, 4 or 5 cents. So I couldn't speak directly to PG&E, but the idea of charging even 38 cents a kilowatt hour on peak, I can't get there in my head about why it would be that expensive or how we would have that spread. They must have just a massive spread between their different resource stacks or et cetera. But we have a bookend really, which is Reading Power that can meet all of our needs, and that's 5.7 cents a kilowatt hour.
And they have time of use rates, which we don't. And if we were going to have time of use rates, we'd have to probably invest $10 to $20 million in AMI to be able to charge those rates. And we are very different than PG&E. If we charge their rates, then we wouldn't have this meeting because solar pay off like right now, in 2 years or whatever. So last year, residents saved $55 million compared to PG&E rates. So yes, we are completely different than PG&E.
Okay, anything else for staff?
Yes, I have one more question. Is you have this $88 average per customer. Roughly, let's say something like the Mount Shasta Mall, I know you can't give a specific customer, but, or the county courthouse, some other big department store, a car dealership, how much does that cost? You know, is there any average cost that fixed cost that comes to the city for that type of customer?
So yeah, there is, and it's significantly more. So about half of our volume of sales goes to residential, and the other half goes to commercial and industrial, right? But we have 38,000 residential customers and only 6,000 commercial customers. So the fixed cost per month, you could say 38 divided by 6. Maybe the fixed cost per month for commercial customers on average could be about 6 times what it is for residential, and it's simply because less customers and more volume, or more volume on average.
Okay, if we don't have any other questions, apparently you skipped one of the items on the agenda on my account, and I appreciate that.
We can go back to that now if you'd like.
Okay, and this is to confirm the Solar Committee's goals and objectives. When we our first meeting, I was one of the loudest ones to complain about having our goals and objectives so narrow, and now it seems like we've been pretty much given a open canvas, and I think that maybe we should consider not narrowing, but setting some kind of limitation to our goals and objectives, because I think this committee could get out into the weeds to the point where we're making value judgments and making recommendations on stuff we don't really understand that well, and maybe even things that city council can't even act upon or change. You know, if we say, well, you know, we should contribute to climate change, well, okay, but what is the city council going to do about it? And is that for us to decide to make a recommendation on? Maybe we should say city council should be sensitive to climate change and to do what they can, but what recommendations are we going to make? So with that, to kind of start the conversation, I just kind of put down a few things. These are just my own ideas with regards to goals and objectives. And obviously, anybody on the committee can add to these or tell me why they shouldn't have them or whatever. But my idea is that we should offer the city council options along this, with committee's opinion as to whether the options will be feasible for further domestic and commercial solar development beyond the regular building code requirements that are going to come up for new home construction. So should the contracts, the new contracts, be based on the framework of the existing contracts with certain changes in them? That's a question. Determine the recommended rate to be credited to future solar customers for energy delivered to the REU's grid. Recommend the terms of the contracts. Will they be 20 years? Will they be 30 years? Will they be transferable? What kind of effects will each of those and other terms have on the payback for somebody investing in solar in the future? Terms under which the contracts may be canceled. Because, you know, in my own, some of you, if not all of you, have heard me speak about this. Without a contract, solar customer will have no way to utilize its solar power. So if the city decided to take their option to cancel the contract within a 30-day notice, that leaves somebody with a $20-some thousand investment sitting on their roof that they can't utilize at all until they negotiate a new contract. So we may want to make some recommendation along that line. I also believe that solar contracts, none of them are actually bankable. You can't just go down to the bank or any kind of finance company and say, I want to put 7 kilowatts worth of solar power on the roof, and I'm going to have $100 a month savings, and I want to use that money to pay you back. They're going to say, well, how much equity do you have in your house? Because we want a second on your house. They don't want a second on your solar system, so they're not actually bankable in that respect. So a canceled contract, again, means the homeowner is stuck with paying off a second mortgage from a bank or a lease company even, with no savings to pay it. And should the city be required to maybe reimburse solar customers if they cancel their contracts, or at least make them whole? It's just a question that I'm throwing out there. Issues that I'm not sure that we really need to address, but we may make some kind of recommendation to REU for REU to investigate, or for the city council to take a look at. And that's things like suggestions for REU's power purchases or their mix of power purchases, what type of power they use. I'm going to leave that to their experts that are going to get the most economical electric power that they can purchase.
Fred?
Yes.
And I'm not sure how many more points, but I just want, for anybody that's listening specifically to that, so last year we did go through an integrated resource plan. We developed it. We had workshops both at the library and at Sequoia's auditorium. Through that, we mailed out items to customers to give us feedback, etc. And we do have a plan. If you go to cityofreading.org/IRP, it says how we will meet our renewable portfolio standards.
Okay. And again, I don't know if it's the committee's responsibility, or even if we want to bite off getting involved in any of that. But there are some things that were brought up that people had, pretty good questions about, but I'm not so sure that there's anything we can do about it, like Whopper rates, the community choice aggregations, how much water you use versus, generating with gas versus solar. We may want to make some kind of suggestions on how REU can control the duck curve to make solar more feasible. I don't know if there's a way. And that's about all that I kind of came up with. Anything else that the committee wants to add as far as like maybe some of our goals and objectives? If you look at what I just gave you, it's pretty narrow. I just don't want to see us get out into the weeds and trying to solve problems that, maybe not just beyond our scope, but beyond our own abilities. Anybody have any comments, suggestions, or?
No, I think that sums it up pretty good.
I have just a couple of comments. I pretty much overall agree. I think we want to stick to anything that can help us get to a I'm going to call it a compromise rate of some sort that's going to work for everybody. But I also just want to make sure we have enough data and information to do that. And I think wherever we need to go to get that data and information, we should be able to do that. So that might be saying the same thing in a different way than as specific as Fred's was. But I don't want to get in the weeds either. I mean, we can really this could take years if we get there. So I don't really want to go there. But I do want to make sure we have access to the information we need, particularly the financial data, to answer all of these questions that, Fred just outlined.
I don't know how much I'm repeating what Fred may have said, but I think one would be the rate, the NEM rate, and also the connection fee. And then, as Mary said, I still have some questions. Like, I'm not sure this $88. I mean, is that including all the business customers, the 6,000 business customers? It's just including the residential.
It's residential's share of all fixed costs. So what is not on, it's not $88 for all 44,000, it's $88 for the 38,000 residential customers.
Okay. I'm still a little vague on some of that, but okay. But anyway, I'd just say terms of contract and the connection fee, or the fee for having solar, so that if there's any set fee because you have solar and you're not covering some of those fixed costs. I'm not sure what else, but I feel like Mary does. There's still a lot of stuff I'm just not grasping here. I don't have the facts. I shouldn't say that to Mary. She might be grasping it. But
So I do have an exercise under item 6 that I think will help us, I don't know if it's narrow our focus, but it will go through kind of each of the items that you spoke about as far as a committee, you all can decide how long is the payback period, is paying it off, and if you have simple payback within 20 years and the warranty is 20 years, does that mean that it's paid off? If the life expectancy of these things can be 30 and 35 years, if you have a payback within 30 years and the interconnection agreements within 30 years, does that work? So I think that I do appreciate your comments of kind of narrowing our focus. Council has already acted on anybody that installs by December 31st. And so I think that the idea is, well, let's, as a committee, and I'll drive the spreadsheet that I have here, of kind of try and calculate, hey, January 1 of 2020, what does the payback look like? And let's decide on the variables.
I just have a comment. Just for the value of people either watching this back in the future, could you identify exactly what council did so that people know that? Not everybody gets the newspaper.
So council, so specific to extending the subsidy for existing homeowners or solar generators, So council, I guess, passed a motion to anybody that has installed solar or anybody who applies for solar by December 31st of 2019 will be on the existing net energy metering rate, which means that effectively when they sell energy to the grid, it'll be at the retail rate and cancel out their usage at the retail rate. And they said that that would last for 30 years from the time that they signed the interconnection agreement.
Okay, so, and this is what I understood also. And so we're talking about what kind of contract are we going to see for solar customers who come into the system after January 1? And what kind of term they're going to have in their contract as far as years? What kind of actual terms of the contract with regards to cancellations, changing of terms and so forth is going to be in the contract? And what kind of credit that they get for excess power that they sell back into the grid? Obviously, anything that they use, they're going to have to pay the, apparently going to have to pay the rate that whatever the current going rate is. If it goes beyond the amount of solar that they produce themselves, correct? I mean, that's pretty much where the council's going, it looks like. So that's I think that's gonna be the heart of what we come up and recommend to the city council. And Joe, you and I had one time talked about, you were talking about putting together a spreadsheet where we could change out some of these variables and play with them. Were you gonna put that like in?
That's item 6. We're ready to roll.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's not pretty, but it will do the job. So on the left, you see kind of variable titles and then the value on the right. So this is item 6 on the agenda. So the highlighted values on the left, monthly usage, generation per kilowatt, what the sizing of the system would be. It's not highlighted. It means it's either a formula. We could talk about the life expectancy. That's not highlighted down there, but I used a 30-year life expectancy because that's what the California Energy Commission's using for the Title 24 cost effectiveness. But with that, I want to point out that while we're saying that there's a 30-year life expectancy on this, over here, where I just clicked, we're putting in the present value of future maintenance because inverters last about 10 years. So we did the present value of replacing your inverter at 10 years and one at 20 years. So if we want to just go down this just briefly, and if you have specific questions about each one, I'm going to kind of tell you how we arrived at this, each amount that's highlighted, and then as a committee you can kind of agree or we can talk about it. So monthly usage, we put 850 kilowatt hours. Historically, that's about what it was. Average usage has declined. It's down to about 807 in fiscal year 18, but that's with solar customers blended into that, right? And so we're saying it's probably still about 850, maybe a little less with energy efficiency, but that's kind of the one we did. So we're saying that just for our mock payoff scenario here, we're going to say that the people are using about 850 kilowatt hours a month. And then, so generation per kW, I put 1554, and so I went on PV Watts. It's a website, and so we just did a 1 kW system based on 96001. How many south-facing roof, how much it would generate, and that 1 watt or 1 kW, sorry, would generate about 1,500 kilowatt hours in a year. So to offset that 850 times 12, right? This formula right here is basically monthly usage times 12 divided by the generation per kW, tells us that we should probably install a system size of about 6.56 kW. The installed cost per kW, so the state says it's about it's 3,170. That's what they just put in their Title 24 documents for the Z&E homes. Mr. Gum provided a a printout of some cost effectiveness or some payoff calculators that showed it installed about $3,150 per kW. So it's within $20. We're using a tax credit of 26%. So January 1, 2020, the tax credit drops from 30% to 26%. So we put that in here. So the export ratio, this has been kind of an area of contention about what is and isn't the right export ratio. So we got a figure from the Solar Energy Industry Association that showed it was about 40%, between 20 and 40%. We had a local mechanical engineer do a model and it showed it was 60%. We don't have that data, and so I called the rates supervisor for Sacramento Municipal Utility District. They're, I believe, are the third largest municipal utility in the entire country. They're also in California. They have 25,000 behind-the-meter solar installations, and theirs is almost right at 50%. That's what our kind of internal sampling was, and I mentioned at the council at the last meeting is that we're about 50% as well. So I would recommend that we use that.
Joe, can
Yep.
I ask one question? The export ratio, can you just define it in plain English, what that means?
I'm
For
sorry.
the non-engineers in the room.
Yeah. So if your system's going to generate 9,600 kilowatt hours in a year, or let's just say 10,000 kilowatt hours in a year, the export ratio would be what did you generate that was sent to the grid because your coincident requirements didn't meet your generation, right? So you sent it to the grid, you sold it to the grid. Currently, that's called net metering, where you'd sell it at the retail rate. So that's a big driver in changing the payoff of this, because what staff is proposing is that when you sell it to the grid, it would be 4 cents versus the retail rate of 15 cents. So it's effectively saying that 50% of your generation is only valued at 4 cents instead of 15.
And just so I understand it, the export ratio means of the total you generate, you consume half and then sell half.
Right.
Is that
and then
correct?
Yep. And the system would be sized to sell half, and then at a later point buy it back when you're not generating nights, things like
Right.
that.
Okay, thank you.
So currently, I have the export rate at 15.48 cents. So that's our retail rate plus the federal environmental surcharge. So just right here to start, to get an idea, it's effectively net metering, right? The light. Go ahead, sir.
I'm sorry. One more thing about the export rate. Okay, if you're generating 100% of your generation, you're using about half, and you're sending about half in. So does that assume that you're netting out? I'm sorry, you're not. Does that assume that you're actually going to have to buy back the other 50%?
At a future point, your
So
over generation,
you're-
you would buy it back. You're
Okay,
effectively
so
using the
you're
grid as a
figuring
battery.
you're going netting out. You're using the same amount that you're selling, basically. Okay.
So the way we sized this system was to basically offset all usage for the entire year. And then the export rate is the retail rate plus our federal environmental surcharge. And then I put the life expectancy in here of 30 years. That's with 2 inverter changeouts. And then the discount rate. So I just used a discount rate of basically a 30-year mortgage. And so if somebody had to buy that, we could talk about whether or not that's a good idea. I mean, the other idea is that if you had cash on hand, if you put it in a CD versus this, it may be less than that. To be conservative, I used the 4%. If you go down to 2%, then solar is much more attractive.
So I have to ask, in selecting that discount rate, you said you used what? A proxy was mortgage rates?
Yeah, so when making business decisions, businesses would usually use their weighted average cost of capital.
Right.
For residential folks, I would say, similar to the bankable comment, that your cost of capital would be effectively a second mortgage, or about 4%.
Okay, so let me ask, what about systems that are leased? Because it's
Yeah.
typical that inherent rates in a lease aren't the same as a purchase.
Yeah, and we could talk about that. I'm not sure what lease rates are, or if people are still leasing. Maybe that's a question for Mr. Gum.
Well, that's a variable that we can play with, right? So I mean,
Yeah, you can change
if we
the-
came up
the
with
discount
a
rate if you
discount
wanted
rate
to-
that for
yeah.
a lease company, we'd put that in, see what it would be for lease customers.
I think that's really important to know, because the cash flow doesn't always work right depends on which way you go. If it's a leased system versus when you're purchasing under.
Right.
Another way.
Or if you paid cash, right? So
Or
we could
you
be,
pay cash
we
out,
could be
right.
saying it's
That's
a 4% discount rate, and maybe you're leasing and it's 6%, or you're choosing this instead of a CD, and really it's 2%, right?
Right. Thank you.
So that, I mean, we can just kind of play with this and do some of our own on-the-fly sensitivity analysis. So this is where it shakes out right now, just with these numbers. Is that the net upfront cost? I did do the present value of 2 inverter changeouts because we're saying it's going to last 30 years, and you get the 20% tax credit or 26% tax credit. So the upfront cost is $17,400, and under net metering, effectively where your exports are valued at retail, the simple payback is about 11 years. That matches kind of what we have seen in Reading. The payback is about 10 years even on net metering, and then I have here the present value of those savings. So that's effectively 30 years times that $1,600 of savings and brought back to present value. So the present value would be $27,000. That's the present value of that investment. And so you can see that you're investing $20,000 and you got a gain there of, oh, I did the wrong math here. $6,600. So your upfront cost is $20,000, and the present value of your savings is $27,000. So there's actually a profit motive here of $6,600. So I think that the fastest way that we can do this is maybe decide on all of the variables before we get to the actual export rate. So come to an agreement on maybe those other amounts, and then get down to effectively solve for X, which is the export rate. So I don't know if there's any specific variables up here that people have comments on or think they should be changed, and then we can kind of change them.
Can you give us copies of that so we can go home and play with them a little bit ourselves and come back with some ideas?
We certainly could.
Are they just, just regular
It's just an Excel workbook, yeah.
Excel spreadsheet?
Yep.
Okay.
Joe,
And I had one more question. Your present value gain or loss, I think you actually had it right the first time, didn't you?
I did, you're right.
Okay.
Net upfront cost.
so my question is on the pencil out, from council, would that be zeroing out the present value? So that's a 0, and then you figure out how to get there, or I guess that's for you guys to talk about.
So that's so I'll just kind of show you. So if we say that you're going to do it with your own capital, and so you're effectively not getting a 2% gain on a CD, like I said, it becomes very attractive. It's $18,000 profit motive. If you're leasing it, right, and you're paying 6%, it's only 4,000. So it's very sensitive to these rates. I use the 4% because most likely, I mean, a lot of people actually do that. They take out seconds or they refinance their house to do solar. But a lot of people also pay cash. I don't know. That's kind of for the committee. I don't know if Bob, you want to weigh in what most people use. Do they pay cash? Are most of the people refinancing? I'd have to defer to experts on that one.
Oh, in the past, the biggest use was leasing, 60%, because it was an easy sale. You'd go to the house and sign the contract and no upfront money, and you're instantly saving X amount every month, up to 10%. Those contracts ended up, problem was the early ones had a 3.5% escalator fee. So that meant that your utility goes up 3.5% a year, well, over 20 years, let's say. PG&E is the same thing, about 3.5% a year. So anyways, if you leased it, you never caught up. Basically, you traded a power bill you just traded power companies is what happened. So mostly now, everyone goes either with a regular loan or they purchase it, because the lease side of it, unless it's big commercial, just isn't a good instrument to use.
Yeah, are you going to put in some kind of a cost? What am I looking for? Retail cost of energy. I mean, if it goes up, you don't. Then all of a sudden you're paying less money for the energy you're using. I mean, you could put that in there as a variable. I don't know if it. Obviously, you guys probably don't think it's ever going to go up, right?
So yeah, if I'm totally honest, at least for the foreseeable future, any rate changes or increases would most likely go to fixed or demand charges, just because of the imbalance in our rate structure as it is.
Yeah. Okay.
So this worksheet assumes that you're getting paid your current rate for excess power.
Correct.
What happens if you plug in your proposed rate? Bingo. Second question, do you have the current exposure to REU of the solar power produced that you're having to pay the retail rate for over and above what people are using on an annual basis?
So I think what you're saying is do we know what that subsidy is on an annual basis?
Yeah.
We calculated that, and that was something that council had in front of them at the council meeting. It's about $900,000 a year that we're currently overpaying. Is our best guess.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments about the spreadsheet?
Touchy, find microphone here. Hey, Joe, on the return of the present value that is paid back to the grid, is that taxed, or is that considered like a business and you have to claim that?
As far as, so the export rate right there, what you sell. So what's going to happen is on your bill, you would have two line items. One would be for energy purchased at 15 cents. And right now we're talking about residential. And then a line below that would be the sales to the utility at 3.9 cents. And so you'd have a net bill, right? And so at the end of the month, you'd have to pay something. And so it wouldn't necessarily be a profit that you'd have to pay tax on. And the city, if the question is whether or not the city pays tax on it, we don't necessarily pay a tax. But every ratepayer does pay a tax. There's a tax on your bill called the state surcharge.
Is there anybody out there currently that exceeds?
Yeah, we do have a handful of customers that, as far as at the end of the year, they've produced far more than they needed, and then they get a credit. Yes, but at the moment, as far as I know, we've never written a check for that, and primarily because we have combined billing. You have water, wastewater, solid waste, and electric, and so you would have to overgenerate so much that you zeroed out all of your energy usage, plus 12 months of the fixed charge for electric, and then you would have to start eating into your water, wastewater, and solid waste. We true that up internally. If somebody overgenerates, it's not like the water department's now getting less revenue, but it just doesn't happen.
Do you guys approve applications, calculated production versus what the house is going to use on an annual basis before you issue that permit, so that people can't install more than they should be?
We look at the prior 12 months of usage, and then we calculate the kind of the allowable sizing on that. That's kind of an initial run at it. If somebody installs, and Bob probably has some experience with this, if somebody installs solar and it ends up not being enough, we do then allow for people to come back and add some panels.
But you don't let them put in an exorbitant amount on purpose.
Yeah, well, the idea is that we don't want some folks to just install a ton of it, right?
Right.
Because then what it does is it
Exacerbates
can box
the
out
whole
their
thing.
neighbors, right? Yeah.
And
It's
then
not supposed to be a profit motive. It's
What
supposed
are
to be.
REU's annual sales dollars?
So retail sales in fiscal year 19 was about $120 million.
20. Okay, thank you.
Well, using the spreadsheet, and we can ask Bob this, but what's the marginal cost of adding additional solar panels? And it almost seems like it wouldn't be feasible to sell it back at 3.9 cents, right?
Well, the way the city works now is you can put in about 80% of your total amount, the way their numbers work out. And then you have to use more. If you put the infrastructure, if you put the inverter in the right size, you put in the wiring the right size, it is more expensive to come back after the fact and do it because you're there on the job site. You roll the trucks again. It's not a huge difference though. But in the city, like I say, they do control how much they can use by pinch it down to begin with.
I do want to point out that the amount here that we use generation, the sizing was at 100%. It wasn't at the 80% that he's referring to, and that is. So the main difference there is we use about 1,752 kilowatt hours of generation per installed kW, and in this PV watts calculator, you can see it's a couple hundred kilowatt hours less, right? And primarily that I believe is because of losses and things like that.
Well, if we play with the spreadsheet, we may find out that it's better to put in something like 50% of your maximum capacity or maximum peak use because the costs, and that way you're using a larger percentage, or you're getting a better plant factor out of your installed system.
Yeah, so if your point is that if it's smaller, less of a percentage would be exported to the grid and then purchased back later, so effectively you have a lower battery fee, right? That's possible. That would be changing the export ratio, and I'm not sure if you change the sizing to maybe meet 50% of your needs, then yeah, your export ratio would probably be less.
Okay. I mean, this is something for developers who are going to have to install solar to think about, when they put solar on new homes, because they're going to have to raise the price of their house a certain amount, and the question is, if you go with 100% of capacity or need, you're going to end up costing the people more money than they're it's going to cost them more money over the long run than what they invested.
Yeah, and Mr. Blanc might be able to speak to this, but I think that the way that most developers are probably looking at sizing post 2020, it's not to fully offset all of it. And the sizing of the solar is for the electric needs. If a house went, say, all electric, I believe that you'd only have to size based on the typical electric size. But Mr. Blanc might be able to speak to that.
I can't, because we don't get involved in the house build, just the dirt.
Okay, if we have no more comments or questions, we do have some public comments on number 6 from Pete Marsh. Pete, is he here? Yeah.
Good afternoon, committee, REU folks, and citizens. Don't have prepared remarks. I wanted just a placeholder to see how things went. A couple of comments on an earlier item. Somebody said that we weren't sure about multifamily, good examples of solar succeeding on multifamily. I texted a note off to CALSA. They said they do have several good examples, so I'll find out what those are and provide them later. So the key is a tool called virtual net metering, and so there's a way. Also, a few of us are looking into low-income housing and ways to make that work. City Council has sort of expressed interest in that. That's not really this topic. Leasing, essentially same answer as what Bob provided. From a slightly different viewpoint, leasing was very, very popular from about 2008 to 2016. It was kind of the best way to make, a solar system used to cost about as much as 2 pretty nice cars. Nowadays, it costs about as much as half a nice car. So since the total cost has dropped so much, people don't need to use a tool like leasing. The economics are better for the homeowner, of course, if they don't lease. So we're seeing in the last 3 years, many more systems are indeed purchased, whether it's cash or a loan. Let's see. Joe, a question on the spreadsheet. You've got a present value loss of $300, and yet it's showing a simple payback in 18 years. And I'm not perfect on all my investment stuff, at least in my head. But it seems like if I've got a present value loss, wouldn't the simple payback be infinite? Not sure, and maybe Lori can help answer that. I'm just. Overall, the structure of it looks fairly good to me. I was a little surprised with the export rate at 3.9 that the present value loss wasn't even more. So, and with that as sort of a specific comment, one suggestion I would have is perhaps following up Fred's suggestion, not finalize this tool today, but say, okay, here's a good framework. Let's let some smart committee people look at it and see if anything needs to be tweaked in terms of the structure before we cast it in stone. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. Joe, am I correct in thinking that the reason why you have simple payback versus present value, that present value takes in the discount rate, right? So when you say simple payback, you're just calling, that's how long it takes to get your principal back?
Yeah, so simple payback is effectively your net upfront cost divided by your annual savings. PV takes into account that $1,000 today isn't the same as $1,000 in 10 years. You can buy a candy bar today for $1.50. 30 years ago, it was a quarter, things like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. I'm going to recommend that on number 6, credit rate variables, that we wait for Joe to send us a copy of the spreadsheet and play with it and come back and get our comments on it, and because that's going to be that's going to be one of the primary goals of this committee, is to come up with some numbers.
I want to point out one thing. If you are going to use the spreadsheet, to remember that we're looking at these rates not just for the next year, right? This is for future years, or the way we're looking at it is longer time horizon than just next year. The solar credit expires December 31st of 2021 unless Congress reauthorizes it. So when you look at the part of the return of capital calculation includes that tax credit. That is very significant when you take that out. Play with that, Joe, and show us how quickly it changes when you don't have that. See, that's pretty big. So it's important to remember that we're looking at these rates. Future customers or future new installations will definitely be affected by that.
The only variable you don't have in there, when we don't know what it is going to be what's going to happen to the cost of solar. You know, it appears to me somebody's going to have to come up with a more economical way of manufacturing or selling or installing solar panels, or
So,
you know, once those tax credits are gone, it's not even close to feasible.
so the state of California, when they went through basically the cost effectiveness of Z&E homes, if you trust their math, they showed that at 18-cent retail power, it paid back 2 to 1 over 30 years. And within their analysis, they did not use the investment tax credit. So take that, I guess, for what it's worth, but they have some pretty significant assumptions that the cost of per kW of installed solar will decline, you could say, probably faster than the investment tax credit going away. I mean, that's their assumptions.
Okay.
That's happened in the past. My experience has been is that the solar equipment costs as much as the rebates are offering. And you watch it, like I've already gotten commitments on my suppliers, tell me that next year they're going to drop their costs 4% to cover the loss in it. So it's a big enough marketplace, there's enough in it that if there's money in it, they'll find a way. Because you remember we're at $10 a watt not too long ago. So,
You know, I was going to say maybe you could make a variable out of the upfront cost also. I don't know.
Yeah, that,
You know.
so that can be done. I mean, I think California's their post-implementation of Z&E within a few years. I think they think it'll be about $2.70 a watt. So that's formula.
Yeah.
And so then you can see that
Okay.
present value gain of $1,900.
Oh, okay. Installed.
So
cost.
that is
Okay,
that is a
the
variable
cost.
right there.
That is a variable. Okay.
I was using the one from Mr. Gum, which was within $20 of what the CEC was saying
Gotcha.
2020 prices would be.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. If we have, do we need to take?
Did you want to? So this is the variables, and maybe a question for Mr. DeWalt. But when we talk, and maybe this is something that you all can think about it, if you do make a motion to come back with this, is if the simple payback is 18 years, does that mean that the interconnection agreement should be 20? You know, contract duration. If the life expectancy of the equipment is 30 years, does that mean the interconnection agreement should be 30 years? And to Lori's point is that tax credits change, the retail rate might change, the value of solar might change, and so does the interconnection agreement, is that 30 years because it's operational? That's always been our view, and then maybe a side agreement that the rate contract lasts for a period of time to either meet this PV payback or the simple payback.
Okay. Do I have a motion to set this aside until the next meeting, and have Joe send us a copy of the spreadsheet?
I'll move that.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, so that's what we'll do. Okay, moving on to number 7. Scheduling of presentations related to value of solar. This was something that I asked to be put on there. We do have, Pete he's spoken several times. He's probably maybe somebody that we might want to bring on with regards to some specifics to help us work this out. And there may be others that the committee members are interested in bringing forward. I'm not talking about bringing a parade of experts in. That wasn't my idea, but committee can do whatever we decide. I think what we'll do first is hear from the audience before we discuss it. They might bring up some ideas for us, okay? So the first speaker will be Ron Dykstra. And followed again by Pete Marsh.
Good afternoon. My name is Ron Dykstra, and I've been a Reading city resident for over 40 years. And first of all, I'd like to thank all the committee members for volunteering for this issue. It's very important. It needs a lot of careful thought. From my standpoint, it's been a bit frustrating to hear city council members repeatedly refer to the current net metering situation as a subsidy for rooftop solar owners. As has been pointed out to the council and to this committee, there may be other methods to determine the value of electricity generated by these systems. I'm certainly no expert. I get confused every time I come to one of these meetings. But from the reading I've done and from what I've heard, these methods take into account additional factors perhaps not considered by the council, city staff, and their consultant. If the city analyzes or has analyzed these methods and disagrees with them, they should state that. But at present, it seems that the city seems to be giving the new information, specifically that provided by Pete Marsh, no weight. The committee must or should determine a fair and equitable pricing for power produced by rooftop solar. But that determination should be done taking into account all pertinent factors of such power generation. So I request that you do schedule presentations from those knowledgeable in current methods of fairly valuing power produced by individual installations, taking into account all relevant factors. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Pete, do you want to add something?
Sure. Again, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much, Fred. I guess I would be humbly honored to put together something for you. I've put together a little draft already. I've consulted with CALSA, and so I'm happy to do that. Fully, I've been paying attention to what Joe and Dan and team have been presenting, and it does seem that maybe some of the broad slate of factors that are looked at in value of solar, some of those don't have as much value here as in other utilities. And one of the key things is that folks do say, yes, it's very location specific. But I think there might be value in just trying to take a look at it, dive into the numbers a little bit. And so I'm happy to help, define a little bit what it is that folks look at. I think that's probably all I have to say right now. So happy to help.
Thank you, Pete. We have one more, John Livingston.
Thank you. I got here late. I was driving down from Grants Pass. I was wondering if the public would be allowed to have access to this Excel spreadsheet also. As a retired engineer, I always like to play with Excel and all the variables and see what the sensitivity is of it to different assumptions. So I would request, if possible, that the public be allowed access to this spreadsheet. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. With regards to scheduling presentations related to value of solar, any comments from the committee? Any thoughts?
Do you want someone from California Solar Storage Association to come to a meeting? Would that help?
Yeah, right now I'm just saying, should we even consider the idea of bringing people up to make presentations? And then what I'm envisioning, and I'm willing to listen to any ideas on this, is that if someone, for instance, I'm going to request that Pete give us like a 10-minute presentation at our next meeting. He's had a lot, he keeps referencing value of solar and so forth, but he can never do it all in a 3-minute presentation, so I'd like to give him a few minutes to do that. But at some point, we might invite someone else. But right now, we're just talking about, I'm asking whether the committee wants to hear presentations from experts.
He could get the same information from the same people that I bring here, or Pete is, and they could talk to him and they could give him the information that he could act as a spokesman. That might be simpler, just to have.
Could do that too. Yeah. Any thoughts on any of this?
I wouldn't mind hearing several presentations, I mean, maybe not more than 2, but on the advantages of solar.
Okay, so the question is, and if we can get on a motion, should the committee schedule presentations as we decide? I think we should decide on each presentation, whether or not we want a presentation by a particular expert. We should make that decision. But the question is, should we schedule presentations related to solar? And if we should, then I'd need a motion.
I think we should. I can't see how having 2 presentations, one by Pete and one by an expert, because they deal, the Calcea people have been dealing with this since '78, and they deal in all the utilities, similar and unsimilar, and so they have more, they can give you an idea of the value that we don't see or you don't take into account.
Okay.
I have a question, just real quick. So, if we wanted to maybe narrow the focus of the experts that do come, one of the exercise we could do now is to decide what the credit rate needs to be for there to be large enough of a PV gain or break even or whatever. And so we sit up here and we say, okay, it needs to be 6 cents. And that way, when Mr. Marsh or whoever does come and speak, they know that they're speaking to trying to select a value of 2.1 cents or 3.1, or is the idea that you want to have somebody come and speak to try and get that amount as high as possible?
What I'm thinking about is the export rate right now makes, the way everything's configured, with a 4% discount rate really is not feasible. So if we're going to go to City Council and say, all right, we're going to need an export rate of X to make solar feasible. And in order to do that, in order to make that recommendation to them, I think the committee is going to need a little bit of ammunition to back it up and say that, well, there's public benefit, or whatever some of these experts are going to tell us the value of solar is. So I think rather than try to decide on a particular number, we would just listen to what they're saying about the values of solar, and if they can actually put it into some kind of quantifiable number, that might help us, come up with what we think is an export rate.
Would you be interested, so to Mr. Ledger's point about societal benefits and things like that, would you be interested in hearing from maybe utility scale solar about the benefits of doing it at scale, or do you just want rooftop only?
I think rooftop right now, because utility scale is something I think council's going to have to decide whether they want to invest in. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that?
Now let's stick with what we started.
Yeah, again, we get off into the weeds too far. We're starting to talk about things that maybe the council's not even considering. We're trying to stick to what they've assigned us to. But at any rate, okay, we had a motion from Bob. We have a second?
Can you clarify the motion?
Oh, we're going to try to get have Pete give us some information, then get a industry person involved with these rates come and give us some testimony.
So you're talking like 2 10-minute presentations?
Yes.
I would second that.
Any discussion on that? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, Pete, we'll schedule you at the next meeting for somewhere around 10 minutes, if you could. Would that be all right? Okay, thank you. And then this other...
I'll get the other person, see which one can be, and see when they can actually be here.
Okay.
Emphasize the 10 minutes.
Yes.
Okay.
Are we going to be doing another doodle poll to see availability for the next meeting, or how are we doing it?
So today was the first day selected on the doodle poll. So I'm probably going to go back to the doodle poll you already did, because it had options for the next couple weeks, and see if there's a time that at least 5 folks are available, and then see if other folks can't move it around. Try and get this get this going quickly. Our hope is that council can have something in front of them by the first meeting in December so they can act, so whatever's decided is ready to go January 1.
Do you remember what the next most available was, or?
Not off the top of my head,
Oh,
no.
okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Nothing. Well, we've already decided on that one. So we have at least one presentation scheduled for the next meeting and possibly two. Number 8, suggestions from solar committee members relative to potential topics for future solar committee meetings. Do I have any suggestions for topics?
I have a question of staff that they can get next meeting would be, there's a low income reduced rate for the first, I believe it's 450 kilowatt hours of a bill of 25%. But what that, how many customers are on that reduced rate and what that amount is, the amount of the discount. And then the other one would be, because this is coming up with the state standards as far as, I mean, you guys have done a great job as far as, you know, a lot of the energy you're producing, but it's going to get stricter as far as, I guess your gas power plant is not going to be allowed at 2045. I'm not really sure, but roughly what your plans are as far as, because solar might be important at that time, you know.
So, I mean, that in 2045, that's 25 years from now, 25 years before today, people were still building coal, right? And so who knows what the energy industry looks like in 25 years from now. And at that point, so we're deciding 3.9 today, or not today, sorry. That's what we had decided for today as staff. That's the value today. But in the future, that could be completely different. Or to Mr. Gumm's point, solar plus storage, that could be the new thing that's incentivized. I think staff's recommendation that it would be always valued at its market price.
I wasn't referring to cost. I meant as far as, you know, plans for your energy sources in the future if gas is not going to be allowed.
Yeah, so our in 2045, that updated legislation was passed just after we finished our IRP. We're going to refresh our IRP, I believe, next year that will show how we're going to meet our energy needs by 2045. And then just going back, we have about 4,000 enrollees on our residential energy discount program, and they get $10 off of their fixed charge every month. So instead of $15, it's $5. And then I believe it's 35% off the first 450 kilowatt hours. And so it works out to, if you are low income, so you make, I believe it's 60% or less than median income in Shasta County, it's up to $34 a month off your bill. So $34 off their monthly bill and about 4,000 subscribers.
All right. Can you email that to us? Okay, thank you. Oh, one more question. Is the, you have discounts for new businesses, and if we could get the total amount, dollar amount on that too.
So it's unique.
New business connections.
So are you talking about so an economic development rate or an economic
Yes.
attraction rate?
Yes.
Right. So it would vary by company that came, but if we were able to out at Stillwater say attract Boeing or something like that, it would be based on, it can be no less than the incremental cost to serve them. So it says in the tariff book that basically no less than the energy cost. And I'm not sure how many, I'm not even sure if we have any, we do have some economic traction contracts in place right now, and I could probably get that.
So quick math tells me that reduced rate is nearly double what the subsidy, quote unquote, is for solar.
I'm sorry, what was that?
That the subsidy for the reduced rate for the low income people.
Right.
My quick math tells me that's almost double what people are saying the subsidy is for solar.
Yeah, council set aside, so to be clear, it's two pots of money. California requires us to spend 2.85% of all retail revenue on public benefit programs.
And that's what they've chose to do with it.
And so council elected to spend about 2/3, and it's through the budgetary process. And we actually went to council, I think it was in the spring of 2017, I believe, or fall of 20, with an updated residential energy discount. And at that time, council said, hey, you spend about $3.4 million a year on public benefit programs, education, energy efficiency, low income. We want you to spend 2/3 of that on low income.
Okay.
Okay, any other suggestions for future meetings?
The only suggestion that I have is if we could please get our packets earlier so we have more time to study it. I didn't get mine till this morning, so that's really not enough time on such a complicated issue. So if you could do that, I would really appreciate it.
Part of it is the speed at which we're scheduling meetings and getting everybody to agree last minute. So we
Okay.
will work on that.
I appreciate
and
it.
As far as the data, we will have the spreadsheet and the presentations on the website.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so when you say you're going to put it on the website, then public can go in and fool around with it. It probably would be a pretty valuable tool for anybody thinking about investing in solar to take a look at it and say, well, you know, what's my discount rate? What am I willing to live with, and so forth. But you'd have to put a few explanations in there regarding the declining tax credit, how that drops down, and what else? You already have some information in there regarding how you calculate your installation, I think.
I think that as far as the tax credits, I wasn't around for it, but there's been, I think, twice now the wind tax credit was supposed to expire, and then it was renewed by Congress. So I would say if I knew what it was happening with that, I wouldn't probably be sitting here. I'd be in Manhattan or something. But we might want to basically go with known knowns, and then if council in the future, if the cost of solar didn't go down by 26% and the investment tax credit did go away, future councils would maybe take up that action with the current knowledge at the time.
Yeah, that's one of those variables we can never really nail down to the last minute. Okay, anything else from the committee?
Yeah, again, that website where the stuff will be posted is what?
cityofreading.org/solarpower.
Okay,
I believe, yeah.
thanks.
And I do have one thing too also that I think we've come to some type of agreement on the committee here with Bob's information on the discount rate too, and kind of determine that leasing has been pretty much nullified. I mean, look at that 4% really hard, and I think looking at even half of that too, when we determine something there as far as percentage wise.
Okay, anything else? With that then, we'll adjourn and wait for Joe's calendar to come around.